I'm Donna Ryan, Enterprise Mobility MVP, earned that back in May. And topic I'm going to be covering here is deploying and manage Edge, both with Configuration Manager and with Intune. So let me go ahead and get my screen share teed up. And I've got a small slide deck just to kind of cover the basics. And then we'll go into some demos. And so, yeah, said I'm Donna. You can find me on Twitter at the notorious DRR. It's actually the best way to get a hold of me if you need to is just through DMs. I do my blogging at MSN.MGR, as well as that's where you can find my community tool Wimwich, which unsurprisingly will make a very, very small contribution as part of this demo. Come on. There it goes. Okay, so what we're going to be covering here, like I said, is both going to be with Intune and Configuration Manager, looking at the mechanism to deploy the browser out as an application, looking at specifically with Intune, looking at how you can configure the channels, which is one of the few ways that you can control some of the updating functionality, and looking at just the basics of the administrative templates to do your essentially your enterprise type configuration. I'm not going to go in the deep dives because that's going to be covered later by other folks. So I'm just kind of briefly touch on it, show where it lives. I'm also going to look at Configuration Manager, the multiple ways that you can deploy Edge, is you can deploy it as an application. You can deploy it out as an update, and you can also piggyback on the update mechanism for installation by using offline image servicing. I'm going to show you too how to configure and deploy the updates, and whether or not you want to enable auto updating. One of the interesting things about the app installation with Configuration Manager is that it's not just downloading an MSI, which it does pull down, but it's actually driven by a PowerShell script. So if you have PowerShell execution blocked in Configuration Manager or through group policy, that is kind of a big deal because it won't install. There is an option within ConfigMan 2010 to set that to bypass. In older versions, it doesn't exist, so that's one of the new options. And with 2010, I can show you where that checkbox lives. Pretty simple stuff. And how essentially how you can manage the your Edge configuration using group policy, tried and true. So let's see. So talking about specifically with Intune, you really have just the ability to deploy it as an app. It's pretty simple, kind of by design. That's Intune is all about ease of deployment. When you are configuring the application through its properties, you do have the option to specify which ring it's going to be in, which is you've got your stable, which is essentially your production release. You have the dev, and I think you got Canary. What those are going to allow you to do is if you're managing a critical web application and using Edge within your environment, it makes sense to pilot out the earlier versions to your devs or your application owners to make sure that any changes that are coming down don't negatively impact your web application. Within Configuration Manager, deploying, like I mentioned just a little bit earlier, you can deploy it out as your traditional application. You have a couple of options within the software update mechanism. And then again with the image servicing, and as I mentioned earlier too, with there's a PowerShell ramification that needs to be talked about, and I'll show you where that stuff is. When it comes to updating Intune, it's going to be the browser's going to auto update, which is cool. It's easy. You can control the frequency of the updates via the administrative templates. But if you don't set that, the browser's just kind of going to do its thing, which, for some organizations, that just may be fine. But if you're using Configuration Manager, you're not stuck with doing an auto update. If you're not going to do auto updates, we're going to have to leverage your software update point. You can use ADRs to roll the updates out if that's what you want to do. You can do manual rolling out, but it's just like any other type update that you can just treat it as it is. It's an update. Again, too, you can set it to do auto updates, which may be handy. And if we are going to be doing your traditional software update mechanism, we're going to need to do the software update point configuration in order to synchronize those updates. From a management perspective, what you have stock within Intune is you do have administrative templates, which also mirror the group policy objects that you can download and throw into sysvol. Within Configuration Manager, you don't really have direct control of the group policy, but there is under Assets and Compliance. I'm not sure where this lives. There is an Edge profiles option that you can go ahead and control some basic, some of the basic settings. But be warned, though, that's for your legacy versions of Edge. That's not going to work on the new Edge, or I'm kind of referring to it a little bit as the cutting edge. So I'll show you where that lives, but don't go in there expecting to build out profiles and then be surprised when they don't work. Last relevant slide. A couple of weeks ago, System Center Dudes released a blog post that covered like 90% of what I'm covering here. So for follow-up, if you need some walkthrough guides down the road, absolutely look at that guide. It's top-notch. From the Microsoft Docs, there's a link on how to do that deploy it with Configuration Manager, some of the ins and outs that we're going to be covering. And there's a link in there to how to deploy it with Intune. And I also threw the link into for the ADMX templates for Edge that you can download and add into your group policy management process. And with that, that's what we're going to be covering. So I'm going to go ahead and close out PowerPoint, and we're going to go ahead and start with Intune, mostly because there's not as much to cover. So here we're seeing, this is my little personal lab tenant. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into Apps, and we can go into Windows, and we'll go ahead and add. Now, what they've done to make this easy is there is, a whole, there's where we're going to go ahead and do our work. So we'll go ahead and click Windows 10, and we can see, it's Microsoft Edge for Windows 10. So we'll go ahead and pull the trigger on that guy. If you needed to make any other side notes on here, that you've had some informational URLs for your end users if they want to go ahead and take a peek at that, you can customize that if you so desire. Leaving your option if you want to throw in an owner or any type of notes, that kind of fun stuff. But the name is going to default there to Microsoft Edge for Windows 10. I'm going to call this one Browser Summit because I already have more than a couple built in here from previous demos and dorking around. I'm just going to give it a unique name. Your app settings, there's not much here, kind of by design. So I was mentioning before with the channels, you have stable, beta, and dev. I think dev has the quickest release cadence, followed by beta and then stable. So, again, if you've got, mission critical web applications that you're running, it's highly advisable to set up different builds within here with Intune and deploy those out to those various users. Once you've built the app with the channel, you can't revert it and change it. And so you may want to have like a dev, 3 separate apps built there, a dev, beta, and stable, deploy those out to the requisite groups. For the sake of expediency, I'm just going to go ahead and take stable. You can force a language if you need to. I think most of us would probably be just fine taking the operating system default, but if you do need to build language-specific versions, you can do that. And then where to assign it. And so, if you need to do a required, you can go ahead and either, pick your group, or you can pick your users, add it, or, throw it into all devices, depending on what you need to do. That's, kind of up to you. You can also, they'll make it available for users, and they can go ahead and download that via company portal. And as well, for some reason, you needed to, remove it. You do have the uninstallation capability. I'm not going to deploy it out, but I can go ahead and hit next. And then you get the, the handy dandy summary of all the options that we've selected. And we can go ahead and create. And this will take not very long. And then from here, you get the usual donut chart of installation issues. And it's kind of, cut and dry. There's not a whole lot crazy going on. From an administrative standpoint, where does that live? We can go to devices, and we can go to configuration profiles, and we can go to create profile. And so in our case, we're going to go ahead and take Windows 10. And then we can go ahead and take an administrative templates. And we'll go ahead and do a create. So we can go ahead and call, give this a name. And here you have your Edge, your Edge policies are, just hanging out right there. And so, I'm not going to go into crazy deep dives on this because there's rabbit holes and very deep discussions and side tangents you could go down based off of what you're trying to accomplish. But from like an updating perspective, like I had mentioned prior, you can modify the auto update check-in periodically, as if you wanted for some reason to rule that was more of an iron fist than letting it just do its own thing. You can absolutely do that. I'm not going to really configure much. Well, you can take a look at one. So I mean, this, if you haven't been in here before, this behaves more or less like group policy, because it's more or less group policy. And so you've got your description, your enable, disable. If we're going to go ahead and enable it, you can go ahead and set your the parameters that you're trying to push out. That's fine. Next, if you need to throw any scope tags in there for keeping track of what we're doing, we can. I'm not, but you have that ability. And then again, you've got your assignments. So if you needed to craft different policies for different users, so you're going to want to have something different for dev versus stable versus beta, you can deploy those out to your various groups like you would do any other type of configuration profile. I'm not going to pick anybody because I don't need to. Your summarization and a complete. And so from deploying Edge from Intune and managing the updating, that's kind of it in a nutshell. Pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of bells and whistles. For bells and whistles, we are going to head over to Configuration Manager. So, all right. I zoom. All right. So, where I'm at in the console, we're in Software Library, and over here at the Edge, Microsoft Edge Management. And we get the a bunch of charts that show we should have a listing of versions. I don't have a whole lot in my lab, which I think is why this is showing. Some of these are showing as messed up, because I've got like I think 1 or 2 active systems. This is actually a technical preview, so there's not a ton in here. I do more of my WimWich development in here than anything else. But you can see your default browsers, so you can get a count of who's using what, your preferred browsers. Prior to my kids doing the virtual school, there was no Google Chrome, but because the school district wanted, or the teachers were using, Google Class, and use Chrome, fine, I'll acquiesce. Actually, what I did use though, I started off using the Microsoft Edge management through the family policies, which is a whole side conversation. If you have kids and they need laptops for whatever reason, the family profile and the family management is actually really slick. You can control which browsers they're allowed to use, block pages. So I had blocked YouTube, which didn't work very well for remote learning. But you can back to more of the enterprise space here. You can also look at your various collections to see how they're working out. So kind of handy stuff. So to go ahead and kick off the application creation, we can just right click right at the folder, and you can see there we got create a Microsoft Edge application. Pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and create said application. So we're going to get our tried and true application wizard installer, but what's a little bit different is this is branded for this particular product. See, yay, cute. So we'll go ahead and do all right, and we need to go ahead and pick a location to download our content to. So let me go over to and select Edge better. So much like we had with Intune, you can pick your channel, but when you notice we have these other options down here. So besides the channels, which kind of already covered, you can deploy specific versions of Edge from here. And so we can go ahead and hit that, and then you've got a whole host of versions if you needed to deploy those for any particular type of application compatibility or functionality. If you need to hard code or hard stop it, you would. If you're going to go down that road, though, you're very likely going to not want to select this guy, because that's where you toggle auto updates. And so if you're going to deploy an older version, you need to keep it there. Clearly, you're not going to go ahead and throw that checkbox. If you don't care and you just want to make sure that you're pushing Edge out, you're getting rid of the old legacy Edge, and just let the things auto update, you could just tell it to take latest and throw the checkbox, as well as I can see, how do you clear that? I'll just go back in here. So as I had mentioned earlier, with the machine policies to restrict execution of PowerShell, this checkbox now exists in 2010, which is pretty awesome. So you don't have to go and try to either suppress Unity Group Policy Object or modify your default client settings where you may have this set. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and take the latest just for fun. I'm going to tell it to bypass. Actually, no, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to go pick an older version, and I'm going to tell it not to. And the reason being, I want to show you how this actually gets built as an application, which is pretty slick. And so, you want to deploy it now. It's kind of like with the Office 365 installer. If you want to deploy it or not, I'm not going to. I don't really need to deploy it out to nobody. Your summary, and we'll hit next. So it's going to go ahead and chug along in the background and go ahead and do a download. While that's running, what this will look like once it downloads, this is a previous version. And so the payload that you get both has the 64-bit and the 32-bit installers. And what's I thought was interesting is the fact that this is actually, kind of, I should stop doing that. But this is driven by a PowerShell script. So when we go ahead and look at the application deployment type, it's actually calling PowerShell exe, calling the file, and then passing the parameters that we specified earlier. And then just for grins too, if we wanted to look at the actual PowerShell script, because I can't help but look at these things now because PowerShell's pretty rad. It's not an overly complicated script. The biggest part is, the hash signature.
Donna, can you possibly zoom that just a little bit? I know you're just talking through it, but.
Yep. My mouse is starting to go haywire here. Can I there we go. All right, so we can look at the parameters, and it's going to take the MSI name, so that's going to get passed to the actual from the file name. That'll get passed to the script. Which channel this is going to be, whether that's going to be stable, dev, or beta, and whether or not to do the auto updates. And depending on the options, it's really just going to go through and set a bunch of registry keys. Nothing really crazy. I did notice, though, as I was poking around in here and getting brushed up, if you're going to deploy this with or against 2004 Windows 10 2004 and earlier, where you had the legacy, this isn't isn't an issue because this application, as it's built within Configuration Manager, is keying on the existence of a registry key, and I'll show you where that is in the application. But if you go in through, with 20H2, where Edge is already installed, the way that the application is built will show as it's previously is installed, and it won't go ahead and honor the settings that you configured, which is where setting it through policy is going to make more sense. But yeah, there's not much crazy going on, and ultimately what ends up happening here is it's going to generate a command line for MSI exec and then pass the arguments. So if we can go ahead and, all right, see, this guy's done. So what I'm going to go do is go over to my application management and go into the application. All right, and there's cutting edge. So I'm going to go to the properties here, and it was kind enough to set up the icon and whatnot, so it looks nice and classy. But you'll notice, though, that we do have the two deployment types that are going to match up with the different architecture of the payload that was downloaded. I'm going to go ahead and take 64, and as notated before, it's just manually calling PowerShell, telling it to use the install edge script, and then here is the name of the MSI file that's downloaded, your channel ID. So it's using a GUID as opposed to calling it with the friendly name. No biggie. And we should then also have, there we go, do not auto update. So that there has been set. Detection method 2, and so we can see if we look at this guy, I edit that clause. This is where it's actually looking on a 64-bit to see where it's installed. And it is true that it's installed, but it wasn't installed by Configuration Manager. So even if I push this out, if my browser is set to auto update, very likely it'll stay ahead of you, which may or may not be a big deal depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your Edge rollout. By just making you aware of that. And so there is all of that. The rest of it is just, deploy that out as usual as you would with any other type of application. But to update, we do have to do a little bit of configuration in our software update point. So I've already done it, but and I'll show you where this is. But ultimately what will happen is after we hit all our checkboxes, we will have all sorts of fun stuff hang out for us, and we'll go ahead and poke into that in a bit. So to go ahead and turn it on, just like we've been doing, if you've been using Configuration Manager for a while, I'm sure you've gotten used to having to configure your software update point, which this is going to control which products and classifications that we're going to synchronize. So you do need to have the updates checked. product. Now, this kind of drives me nuts because, historically the products, the name matched, which the heading was, like here's exchange. These are all exchanges. There's expression. There's expression. So you'd think edge would have its own. Well, yeah, there's no edge. Okay, maybe it's the new edge. It's not there either. Where is it? It actually lives under Windows. So just as a heads up, it's not the most obvious space. I guess it makes sense because it is a Windows component. But with everything else being Windows, you would expect this would be Windows, but it's not. But anyway, there's Edge. So make sure that that's ticked. The classification has been ticked. And go ahead and do a software update point sync. And that's all you really need to do to start getting the metadata in here to allow you to work with this. So after you've done your synchronization, you can come back over into here. Now, just for the sake of cleaning this up a little bit, I'm going to do... No, I don't want to see expired. Nope. Let's try that again. Here we go. So that should clean up about half the entries to make this a little bit easier. And so you can see here that you've got your updates, your most current updates for, there's your beta channel, your dev channel, your stable channel, also for 32-bit, 64-bit, and ARM. So those are going to be your updates that you would roll out. You can do automatic deployment rules. If you want to, you can do the download and deploy those, because that's all it really is an update. If you're like I said before too, if you're using auto update, this isn't relevant. But you also have here this the new Microsoft Edge, and you can see you've got various architectures, and you also have various OS builds. So what are those? I can pull one of those up for you, and I should have that under here in File Exploder. What I'm looking at here, this is my Wimwich update cache. If you're not familiar with Wimwich, it's a little community tool that I wrote to allow you to do offline image servicing, and it gives you a GUI. So those updates are actually considered classified as an optional. If you wanted to pull those down from Wimwich. This also works with OSD Builder. I think Dave has a specific switch built in there or a specific option to control this. But drilling into my Windows 10 2004 build and optional, hey, there's the new Edge. And what is in there? Well, it's actually a cab file. And so I was at first kind of half expecting it to be an MSI. I'm backing off of that, but nope, it's just a cab. But you can use that to upgrade, your down versions that are on the legacy. So that's kind of handy if you want to roll that out. But if you don't want to have it as a separate discrete step, you can go ahead and inject this update into your offline imaging process, and then it's just done, and the thing is installed right out of the gate. And I guess just to show where this lives within Wimwich, if you're going to be in the update catalog, you're going to want to hit the optional updates, which will go ahead and synchronize those. This will work both with Configuration Manager and with OSDSUS. It doesn't matter on your update source, but since I'm on a Config Manager server, clearly I'm using Config Manager. The other thing to do, if you're kind of new to Wimwich, is you're also going to make sure that you do your enable updates and you include your optional. And then from there, it'll go ahead and apply that cab. It's going to upgrade the baked-in old Edge on the operating system. So when when you're done, it's all done, and you didn't have to worry about trying to deploy that. And so that's essentially our mechanisms for deploying that out via Configuration Manager. Any questions on that so far before I kind of start touching on group policy? Crickets I'll take as a no. Okay, so if we're going to go into group policy, Natively, the stuff that we want doesn't exist. So what we're going to want to do is go download them. And so we can go to that link that I provided in the slide deck. And what you're going to do is tell it, which channel, which build you're going to use, and which platform. And then see now the get policy files has become enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that, accept the Yuga. I can have my arm and leg, and you're going to get a zip file. And if we go ahead and crack this thing open, there's a bunch of good stuff in here. What we want is going to be within Windows. So what we can do is go into Windows, go into your ADMX, and then you're going to copy these three guys into in through sysvol.
Hey, Donna.
Yes, ma'am.
I think some of this is what Chad's covering. Is that right? I don't want to, because he's going. Yeah, he's starting in on GPOs as well. Is
okay.
That right,
so,
Chad?
Yeah, I'm covering all that.
Okay.
So yeah, and we're at time. So, anything else besides the GPO stuff that you had for us?
No, I was just going to show the real high level of where that's going to be. But if it's going to be covered next, I'll go ahead and back off on that one. So the last thing, again, for recap, if you wanted to cover this stuff later, I just really did want to point out the System Center dude's blog post. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel and rewrite my own, but this covers darn near everything outside of the offline image servicing and group policy stuff. So this is a fantastic resource if you need to have a walkthrough to do this in your own environment, and I'd encourage you to pull that down if you need it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Donna.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.